Good morning, friends. It's about 1 p.m. on Wednesday, the 20th of September, 2017. And today's podcast would be about the general situation in India, which has not improved in any substantial or significant way. And people are observing and commenting upon it on the internet. And one of the things that BJP has started doing is to start comparing its performance with that of Congress, and to therefore suggest that it has somehow done a little bit better than the Congress. Well, the benchmark of Congress's performance is so low that anybody, in fact, anybody with any common sense should have done 10 times better. But of course, BJP doesn't have any of that. And we know what Einstein said about insanity, isn't it? He said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And the BJP is doing exactly what the Congress did, 100%. There is no difference that can be identified as something that the Congress had not done in the past. And therefore, for anybody in the world or anybody in India to expect different results to that of what Congress produced must surely rank as a form of insanity. And yes, it is true that India has been taken down the gurgler by the socialists for 70 years. And it is the people of India who have allowed this to happen through their insanity. And I mean by insanity the complete lack of thinking, the lack of asking questions, the lack of critical thinking, which I earlier spoke about. Why are we doing things that have failed repeatedly, one after the other, across the whole world for 100 years and more? Why are we following socialist model of governance? Is that something that we should probably ask ourselves about? Is that something that people need to question, maybe sometime in their life? Why are we doing things which are guaranteed to fail? And so the BJP's performance is absolutely banal and pathetic. Its growth rate in GDP is in fact much lower than it was in the early years of the last decade, in the middle of the last decade. And we've seen the effects of demonetization. We are going to see some effects of the implementation of GST reforms, which have been implemented extremely poorly. And this is all going to show up in the so-called GDP results. But really, that is not what we are looking for, isn't it? We are looking for a significant change in our quality of life, and in a change in the way the bureaucracy works, the politicians work, the corruption, doesn't happen, justice is improved, and none of that is happening. So I think the point I want to make in this podcast is that we as citizens of India have a lot of work to do. When we avoid thinking, when we assume that just because somebody is the son of Nehru or the daughter of Nehru or whatever, or somehow has been a great vocal speaker like Modi or Vajpayee, we somehow think that these people automatically know what there needs to be known as far as governance is concerned. But these people are simply demagogues. They have no clue. Or they're basically even worse. I mean, people like Rajiv Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, they're basically hereditary, a fiefdom of some sort. We have converted, these people had shamelessly converted India into a fiefdom, calling it a democracy in name, but then, one after the other, the children are, supposed to lead. And even today, the Congress is basically, twirling around the fingers of one illiterate woman who married Rajiv Gandhi, and then she supposedly became the leader of this party. And it is quite amazing how we have failed completely as citizens to question how these political parties function. It is in desperation that people in India voted Congress out in 2014, and I really don't know whether it's going to come back. But really, there's no difference between the two, Congress or BJP. And if anybody thinks there is a difference in terms of output, please show it to me on the ground, because I've been going to India regularly, and there is no difference. And all the reports show that there is no difference in the output. So what do we need to do? What I think we need to start is by asking, why are we following the system that was implemented by the British in the late 1800s, 1700s, or the 18th century? That's the system, the Indian civil service system, or whatever, that the IAS now is called, that was implemented by people like Lord Cornwallis, and in fact started before him with the writers of the East India Company. We managed to get the system, which was designed specifically for colonial rule, and we continue with that 70 years after independence. And if anybody questions why do we have this at all in the first place, I find that people in India are unable to even comprehend what I'm asking. They sort of, it beats them that somebody could even ask that, a God-given thing like the IS is not really necessary. In fact, it is a harmful thing for India. We need to start asking questions of this sort, that why do we do things which have given us the bad results? Why do we keep doing the same things? And in this regard, we also need to work out that, do we have a democracy in reality, or do we have it only in name? And what I mean by that is that in a real democracy, we expect our representatives to be some of the best people of the society. We don't want to be represented by the average. We don't want to be represented by the below average. We don't want to be represented by the crooks of society. We want to be represented by the very best that our society has to offer. And that's what democracy and the process of voting and elections should do. It should lead to us selecting, through our voting process, some of the very best people of India who are both competent, capable in their understanding of the world, and diplomatic approach to solving problems, and whatever necessary leadership skills are there, plus knowledge to actually govern. What we have managed to do in this distorted democracy is, of course, Nehru's started the whole process. We know how he completely dampened our democracy. Yes, he was a Democrat. He wanted to improve democracy. But in reality, what he did, he basically forced down a system on us by which the elected representatives are considered to be in some form of, they're doing a kind of service to society, and therefore they're not to be paid much. So the idea that these servants of society who are our representatives, they should be really paid very poorly. This idea took root right to the socialist model that Nehru was implementing, and it severely dampened the the salaries of the bureaucrats, and many of them became very corrupt after that, and it also dampened the interest of good people in joining politics, because the only way that they would get money in that manner of a reasonable sort is by doing corruption. So Nehru prompted in the socialist model a model of a necessary model of corruption, which I've explained at length in Breaking Free of Nehru, my book, in chapter 4. So I think the 2 points that I'm talking about here are essentially the detailed in chapters 4 and 5 in my book Breaking Free of Nehru. Chapter 4 talks about how we are not a democracy the way we function. Only those with hereditary roles or powers, and many of them are 100% corrupt in any case. So they are the corrupt of them. They're the extreme corrupt people. And alternatively, we have others who have, basically looted the people, indulged in black money, never declared incomes. And these are the people who are then being offered by the big parties. The big parties do not offer any competent person I have not come across any single competent person in any of the political parties, the main political parties of India. There's nobody whom I could be willing to go and meet and argue that this person, is something worthy of my time and attention. But what we need here is completely to rethink our model of democracy, the way we have designed it, and to rethink our bureaucracy. And unless we do these two things, and these are called systemic reforms, governance reforms, fundamental governance reforms, without the ability to actually sit down and work through these issues and then come out with a model that works, we are going to continue with the same old pathetic performance that we have seen for the past 70 years. So at this stage, for my message, I guess, to people who may be listening to this, which is something I've been more or less saying for the last 20 years, is that we need a liberal political party, a party that's founded and believes in freedom, individual freedom and dignity, believes in a limited role of government, and believes that the right incentives need to be put in place so that the kind of governance we get is actually of a reasonable, good quality, rather than being the kind of shabby, corrupt, hopeless governance that we have today. In this regard, I might add that I've been paying close attention to my own batchmates from the IS. Many of them were chief secretaries. Some of them are still chief secretaries. Many of them are full secretaries of Government of India, and diplomats or whatever. And I've been monitoring them, and I have been getting reports, extensive reports of corruption from my own batchmates. So the idea that the IS, unaccountable bureaucracy that we have created, is highly corrupt and remains corrupt till the very end, is the kind of thing which I would like to change. And I would like us all to think about why it is that I had left the IS. Now, this is not something that you might have come across in the past. Somebody resigning the IS out of sheer disgust at the unsuitability of the system for the country that I wanted to work for. Now, I sit here and I explain these things, I write about it, I talk about it, and I expect and I hope that some of you will start paying attention that if you really need to get a great country, which you should, which you deserve, you really need to start thinking about the basics of governance. It's a kind of thing that I've been talking about for a long time. There's a lot of literature that I put out, my books, my blogs, my videos. There are videos on the Swarna Bharat Party YouTube channel, on the Freedom Team of India YouTube channel, on my own channel. There are extensive documents that I produced. The Swarna Bharat Party manifesto itself is a comprehensive document. In each case, it does require you to get out of your existing mode of thinking, in which you assume certain causes for our corruption or for our problems, and do not allow for a detailed analysis and critique of your assumptions. So, for example, I'll just talk of a couple of these assumptions that I keep hearing about and rebut them in a minute or so. For example, the first one I hear a lot is India's population is very large. Well, did you know that India's population was just 300 million when India became independent? And even then people called it large. And now it is 4 times that population, and yet people are well fed or whatever. They at least are not dying of hunger. So population, in what way is that a problem? And population, in fact, I have argued in Breaking Free of Nehru that India would have never had this high rate of growth of population in the 60s to around 1990s. The rate has come down significantly since then. If we had allowed for a sensible model of governance, it is the extreme poverty that was created by socialism which led to the demand for children. I mean, my entire doctoral dissertation is all about the demand for children, and it has to do with the insurance motive and the fact that people need to have somebody to look after them in their old age. And there's a comprehensive proof about this particular theory. And so what is going on is that the poor people are actually forced to have more children because they have no other means to look after themselves when they're old. And so they expect some of the children who survive will look after them. And of course, we had this fertility boom because the infant mortality rate was forced down from around, you know, um, what is it, 500 per thousand children dying to as little as maybe 100 or even less now, much less than now. So this is forced down by medical innovations and interventions, and as a result, we had the supply side of children increased. The demand had remained pretty much the same, which is from the poor, and the net result was a huge boom in population. All of that could have been minimized and significantly avoided if India had allowed good models of governance, which is basically capitalist models of governance, to be implemented, to have accountable governance. And so the poor would have had significant opportunities. And I won't go into detail. I'll probably talk about that on a separate occasion. But the fact of the matter is that population is not the cause of India's problems. It is the consequence of India's problems. And India's problems are the socialist model of governance. And I think in my first talk I referred to the other idea that Indians are culturally backward, or Indians are culturally unfit, or their IQs are poor, etc., etc. Well, in each case, particularly the IQs, I've explained that IQ is dramatically affected by nutrition, and in India the nutrition levels are virtually close to zero compared to the rest of the world in a comparative manner. And so naturally we have some of the world's lowest IQs. The poorer you are, the lower your IQ. Simple as that. It's to do with nutrition and the kind of opportunities you get. Like much of the IQ is to do with the kind of learning and school education you get. So IQ is not a good measure of any of these intellectual abilities. And I've argued that despite India's average IQ being that of a moron, I think the IQ is around 80 to 90, which is pretty much a moron. People are actually quite capable, even if that IQ, to manage their lives, to have to get married, to have children, to do their trade and business, and to keep accounts, and to run their households. So yes, IQ may not really add up, but that's not the reason for India's problems. That is caused by India's lack of nourishment and nutrition, which then leads to the low IQ. And so again, we are mixing up the consequence with the cause, and that's really the mistake of analysis. The other one that I referred to was the cultural aspect, that Indians are somehow culturally designed to be irrational. And yes, they are very irrational. I mean, there's no doubt that there's a lot of irrationality in India, and everybody acknowledges and recognizes that. But that irrationality was all over the world. It's not something new. India is not the leader in world's irrationality. If you go backwards in history, you find the more weirdest forms of irrationality. You go to Egypt, you got this weird Egyptian civilization, and it's completely irrational to bury people on top of below a pyramid. What nonsense is that? Absurd nonsense. And yet that was considered high civilization, but it's irrational. Okay, so, and as you go into the European tribes of 2,500 years ago, there were basically nothing out there. So there's no rationality in the West. The argument that the West is somehow born rational is nonsense. They basically are the same species. They all have come out from Africa, and they've all adapted in different ways to the environment, but they're basically the same old species. We are absolutely the same, 100% the same, whether we live in India, America, or wherever we are. So what is then the issue? Is the culture causing our problems in India? Of course not. It is a lack of thinking, which is not a cultural issue. It's a lack of understanding. It's a lack of pointing out. It's a lack of education. It's something which people like me have to do. We need to show people that, look, you need to think, and as you think, you will find the answers. So here's the case. Culture is not the barrier. Culture is an intermediate step which probably comes in the way of explaining things to people, and it sort of maybe hinders in people's wanting to understand. So there's a lot of this bhakts, BJP's bhakts, and all these bhaktas or whatever you call them, and these people are simply, they tune out the moment you talk anything about rationality. In fact, they I've seen people where even if the smallest reference is made, incidental reference, that maybe the Hindu religion had this problem or whatever, they will just come out and say, no, Hinduism perfect, and we never kill and we are great. Well, actually they are not, and they can see in front of you there's a lot of things going on as a result of Hinduism, Islam, and all those kind of things. Irrationalities are part of the religious background of humanity. All over humanity, people have been religious. They continue to be religious in vast numbers across the world. So at least I would say 60 to 70% of humanity is still extremely irrational. And that includes many people in the West. So there's nothing God-given about the West being somehow rational and the others irrational. It's all to do with education and the kind of exposure you have to different ideas. So the kind of ideas that I talk about, I'm not sure everybody's heard about. I'm not sure it's commonly known about. I'm not sure people have got used to the idea of asking questions. So when you ask questions, you will get the answer. So the culture, in that sense, is a universal phenomena. The whole of humanity was having a bad culture, and even today, vast chunks of the West have a really poor culture. So what is the way to solve our problems? Our way to solve our problems is to use reason. And as I explain at length in many other places, and I will probably do that in some other day on this podcast as well, individually, each topic, we need to look at what incentives are at work in our democracy, what incentives are at work in our bureaucracy, and what are the incentives that our policies create, our economic policies create for our own people. When the government takes over and nationalizes various activities, what does it mean for the ordinary person? What incentive does he or she have? We need to understand the problem of the commons. We need to understand the free riding problem. We need to understand public choice theory. Now these are all they may sound difficult, but they're really common sense things. Everybody understands them. And maybe one of these days I'll explain some of these in more detail. But the general point I'm making here is, let's go back to that, is about BJP and how BJP has failed. Well, I had already mentioned when it came, it's going to fail. There is simply no possibility. You can take it in writing from me. I mean, this is simply never going to happen. The BJP cannot change anything in India because they have not even started looking at the incentives at work in the governance system. And so the governance system is 100% the same. The policies are also pretty much the same. A couple of minor changes here and there, the tweaks I would call them. In fact, the way things have been implemented, such as GST, are probably the worst ways, one of the worst ways you could possibly implement such a straightforward policy. And the way demonetization was implemented is beggars belief that anybody could even think of doing that. And so we have this spectrum of policies. Yes, there are some reasonably good things happening in terms of bankruptcy laws, and we need to see how it works. But many of these have been going on for many, many years, and the Congress would have done it, and BJP has done it, or whatever, FDI and retail and this and that. That's been going on, and people have been there within Congress, BJP, both of them arguing for, against, and none of them actually asked the people of India, why are we stopping anybody from investing in India? Why are we being so stupid? And the people of India never asked these guys. And so in India, it appears to me there's a lot of passion. People get somehow fascinated by, hey, here's this guy Manmohan Singh, and he's such a great economist, and of course he's not. But the fact that they will think he's a great economist for a long time, and they will write great praise about him, and then suddenly it all falls apart. Of course, that had to. The guy is simply a typical socialist, useless kind of a fellow. He's done absolutely nothing useful in his life. In fact, the only thing that happened in India was due to Narasimha Rao, using the opportunity created by India's bankruptcy of 1991 to allow some more freedom. So yes, Manmohan Singh was the man on the spot, but it is all about Narasimha Rao really. And of course, he had his own defects, and I won't go into details about Narasimha Rao. The overall point that I'm making is that it is up to the people of India, it is up to us to work out what we want. And if we use our passion and emotion and stop and never use our reason, we are always going to land up in the same old mess that we were. We need to start asking Modi to change the governance system. How many people are doing that? I'm really amazed how our so-called journalists and our great writers, and I won't name them, but I really have absolutely nobody whom I respect, really respect in India, because not a single person understands the governance system. And they've actually all about making the shortcut analysis and jumping around and waving their arms about. Nobody has gone into the detail that is necessary to actually make things work. Well, that's all for today. I think this is a good introduction to the fact that BJP is actually going to continue to perform as badly as it has ever done before. There is simply no possibility of that improving. And it also, I suppose, it's a prompt for you, the reader, to start reading some of the stuff that I've been writing, but also the manifesto of the Swarna Bharat Party. And of course, if you really want to do anything and to have an India that works, you have no choice. And I'm making it absolutely clear. You have zero choice apart from Swarna Bharat Party. There is nobody in India who understands governance. There is no person in India who can actually change things and make them better for you unless you actually follow very diligently the Swarna Bharat Party manifesto. But also there's a lot of knowledge there that's not in the manifesto, which is part of the general, the kind of communication and economic analysis that I've been talking about for the last 20 years. I don't have time to explain everything in detail, but there's a lot of that which underpins some of this work in the Swarna Bharat Party manifesto. And I hope to explain some of that so that people start understanding that this is something pretty deep and critically and based. It's not based on some random, waving of arms. It's based on evidence. It's based on theory. It's based on a solid understanding of human nature. Only through that process will India succeed. And with that, I wish you the very best for the remainder part of your day. Thank you. Bye.